If you've just joined us, we have about 2 hours and 15 minutes to go on our in-depth program on this Sunday afternoon with Noam Chomsky. Next call, Peoria, Illinois. Hello.
Hello. I'd like to question the effectiveness of demonstrations, and especially civil disobedience, in effectively changing U.S. policy. In the Vietnam War, it dragged out for 17 years. Public opinion turned against the war in 1968, yet the war dragged on for 7 more years, and the opinion polls and public opinion research showed that the public, even though they hated the war, they hated the demonstrators even more. So that just prolonged the war. And like we have a march here in Peoria, a rally against the war in Iraq, we had 200 marchers. We got 5 inches in the newspaper, 1 little inch of new information why people should be against the war. You're never going to be able to demonstrate in the street, get coverage like that, and get your message across. You had to do direct door-to-door literature dropping, stuffing doorknobs or canvassing door-to-door to get your message out with a full sheet of paper with all your arguments. The media is not going to do your job for you. They'll not get your message across in the detail and the full expression that you like to see. Maybe letters to the editor even would be more effective than the demonstration, because demonstration you just go an inch, and letters you just get maybe 4 or 5 inches of full explanation of what you're doing. And in Illinois, during the Vietnam War, we were much more effective in electoral politics with McCarthy and George McGovern. In fact, the Democratic Congress caucus in the House voted against funding for the war, despite the fact that McGovern lost, that McGovern had just demonstrated enough strength in election districts across the country at the grassroots level that the congressman knew that next time up they would see challenges to the congressional seats in the congressional districts where McGovern successfully elected delegates. They saw the handwriting of the war. They voted to cut off the funds in the Democratic caucus in the House. And the day after that, Nixon signed the peace treaty and ended the war. So that was the effective way, electoral politics. But here, people, I went to a Chicago teaching for peace and justice yesterday, and they're chortling over 10,000 people blocking one street in Chicago. And they're using that as a big victory. But the government could easily use an alternative street, run tanks down the street to mow people down. That's totally a symbolic victory. These demonstrations don't accomplish anything. In Illinois,
Peoria, I'm going to let you go. Thanks. You made your point.
One part of what you say I completely agree with. Just demonstrations, not connected with day-to-day ongoing educational and organizing activities, are pointless. But take the case of the Vietnam War, which was dragged out. In that case, I think the evidence is pretty strong that the demonstrations were very effective. They were part of exactly what you're suggesting should be done. They were part of day-to-day organizing educational activities, and the demonstrations grew out of them, stimulated other people to join, made other people understand what was happening, contributed to the activism, which ultimately, after many years, led to the appearance of political figures who were willing to become, the leaders of or the official leaders of what was by then a mass popular movement. And that was after years and years of very hard work, including demonstrations. And I think there's very strong evidence that they were successful. If you want to have some direct evidence for it, in 1968, after the Tet Offensive in January 1968, the business world turned strongly against the war because it was becoming very costly to the United States. It was becoming costly because Lyndon Johnson was never able to call a national mobilization of the kind that was called during the Second World War, which led to a very efficient economy. He wasn't able to do that because there was too much discontent. They had to fight what they called a guns and butter war, which led to stagflation and economic problems. The discontent was the result of activism, including demonstrations. Johnson was essentially, it was a real power play from the business world. He was essentially told to call off the war after the Tet Offensive, which indicated it was going to go on for a long time. He wanted to send 200,000 more troops to South Vietnam. The Joint Chiefs of Staff were opposed. The reason, they said, was because they thought they would need the troops for civil disorder control in the United States, where large segments of the population were just getting out of hand. They mentioned women, youth, minorities, others. This is in the last part of the Pentagon Papers, worth taking a look at. The disorder and the discontent revealed themselves in many ways, demonstrations being a very visible part, but much more than that. And the appearance of politicians, Eugene McCarthy's a good case, was much later. And only when there was a mass base for it, then the politicians appeared. Before there were a few. Grinning and Morse were two, but very few until a mass popular movement had developed.